traveling in Indonesia, Kyoto in Japan. So today, Professor Dar about will have a lecture. Today, he is a professor of Future City Laboratory, or also the science director in Ethiopia, and his main interesting things is alternative material for building. And today he will introduce the task system about the building as a system. We'll mainly focus on how the material, the building material will be in the stock in the urban environment and flows out. So how we can utilize the building materials efficiently in the development countries.
Okay. Yeah, thank you very much. I think the task I was given to you is to talk about the idea of how we understand actually building as part of a bigger system. And what I'm trying to do to you today is kind of showing you an overview, also my own learning curve, let's say, over the past years, that is important for us architects, and I think architects to understand that we are operating in a context and in a field that is usually not as perfect and as kind of protected as it is here in Switzerland. As it was said, I'm part of the so-called Future Cities Laboratory. Do you all know what this is? Yeah? So it's an outpost basically in Singapore of the ETH, mainly featured by the Department of Architecture. And that question, of course, when you start thinking about the Future Cities Laboratory, the first questions that come to our mind is, where will a future city be built? What do you think? Where will the future cities be built of our planet?
Southern Hemisphere,
Huh?
developing countries.
Sorry?
Southern Hemisphere, developing countries.
Yes. Basically, you can see here that is the urban population growing rate of the world. That mostly in so-called developing territories, Southeast Asia and also Africa, still in South America, the highest urban population rates are, as we speak, happening. And that, of course, requires also that when we think about a future city or the task of building future cities, we should forget about the context of Europe or Northern America. Europe and North America is built. So being in this kind of context and understanding that, as it was mentioned, of course, you can compare this map with the so-called the population growth as well. So you see exactly in this territory that we just talked about, the population growth is the highest in the moment. And also when we overlap that with the so-called developing territories or developing countries, you see that also in the zone, all of our so-called developing territories are to be found. Now, you see that one continent here in the middle of this map is the one that apparently is sticking out in all of the charts I showed you before. So it has the highest population growth, it has the highest urbanization rates, and it belongs maybe, or at least in our minds, it is still the continent that we kind of combine with developing territories immediately. This continent, Africa, went the last couple of years through a tremendous transformation. So you see here two covers of a magazine, The Economist, maybe you know the British magazine, in the year 2000 is writing about the hopeless continent. You see a person with a weapon on his shoulders and basically reflecting the image of Africa in the 1980s, 1990s, of finding identification and mostly rebelled with civil war. So this image, of course, you can also see the color is a black color. It's super dark and basically giving this continent no future. So whatever they tried or whatever was kind of on the hope was more or less turned into a hopeless continent. Only 11 years later, in the year 2011, the same magazine all of a sudden is publishing a cover saying Africa Rising. And all of a sudden you see a small child running on the savannah, the sunlight in the bank, a kind of a playful vision of the African continent. with colors, the rainbow colors compared to the black. So only apparently in 11 years, only, something completely changed. And the question is, what did change and what effect does this have? When you look at the fastest growing economies today, so in the year 2011, 2015, we are here right now, you will find that out of this list, 11 countries, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 countries out of 10. 7 countries out of the top 10 are countries located in Africa. You have on top, of course, the two superpowers, China and India, which still belong apparently to the developing territories. But after that, you have countries like Ethiopia, Mozambique, Tanzania, Congo, Ghana, Zambia, Nigeria. And you see that also already in 2001 to 2010. So apparently in that moment where this first cover was published, even Angola being number 1, Nigeria, Ethiopia, Chad, Mozambique, Rwanda are already on this list. Now you can argue, of course, economy starting from zero is very easy to grow. Right? That is basically reflecting simply the growth rates, the GDP growth rates. But looking at this graph, you also see that the African countries, to the annual average, are passing around the year 2000, 2002, 2003, are passing actually the Asian countries. So in this moment of time, in the early 2000s, a lot of civil wars kind of were resolved in Africa. More political stable systems came into power, and people in Africa realized that in this kind of ideology of peace, there's also something found to be economical growth. And all of a sudden, you see here another cover, Africa, the next big economic boom. When we look at the same time at the consumption of building materials worldwide, so you see here a basic materials consumption of the world, you see exactly on this moment, in the year 2000, you see all of a sudden that something is happening with the building material consumption worldwide. And that all of a sudden cement, aluminum, and steel becoming the most used building materials worldwide. And by far the most used building material. Does somebody know why? What happens around this period in the 2000s, early 2000s?
That same transition?
European and North American companies and governments are starting to implement new building technologies into Africa. And these building technologies are based on technologies which are already known in Europe and North America. Mainly, and this is an image of Ethiopia, mainly the technology of concrete. So you see here new construction sites in Ethiopia, in the capital Addis Ababa. With the technology 10 years ago, this technology was unknown in Ethiopia. Nobody knew in Ethiopia how to use reinforced concrete. But in this case, with the help of the German government, this technology, you see here cement stones, you see here beam structures, prefab beam structures with steel reinforcement steel sticking out, which are placed as ceiling elements on the ring beams, and then concrete ceilings are basically placed. All of this is introduced by the so-called developing aid, in this case from the German government. You can take any other government in Europe or North America. Now this is helping to build up the economy.
Sorry, and the aluminum?
Aluminum windows.
Just for windows?
Windows. Facades and windows, I will show you. Facades and windows.
That's profitable in Africa?
Yeah.
Or is it just a technique, or is it really?
Well, that is a very good question. You're asking the right question. What happens? What happens if you start to introduce a technique and small and medium enterprises are starting to use it? Right? They're getting familiar with it. They know how to deal with the concrete. They know how to mix it. They know how to place it and stuff like that. So what happens? Yeah. What do you need to do so? What do you need to build such houses? or new cities?
The materials?
The materials. How many countries do you think, out of 54 countries in Africa, how many countries do you think produce steel out of the 54? Have a wild guess, huh? 2. Egypt and South Africa. These are the only 2 countries in whole Africa, right? I mean, Africa, that is like, I don't know how many, the size bigger, 10 times bigger than Europe, I don't know, 20 times bigger than Europe. Only 2 countries producing steel. So let's say you are now an architect or a client in Ethiopia, and you just introduced this new technology. And you know, to build such thing, I need steel, for example. Who do you call for steel?
Developed countries.
Exactly. You call exactly those countries which introduced you to it. Now back to your question. What is the economic interest here? Developing aid or making your GDP better in Germany or in North America?
They're both in the second.
The later, right?
Yeah.
So you see that this whole kind of, developing aid and we're so good to our neighbors and we help Africa, it has a second side to it. It has a dark side to it. The dark side means economic profit. And you can go really seriously, now you mentioned aluminum, go through any material you find. They have to import it. And that results in something. Here, let's go back to Ethiopia. These charts show you the trade deficit of the country. So basically you see the exports, these are the light blue. This is how much Ethiopia is exporting goods to the world, and that is the amount of goods that are imported in the country. And you see that this column of the imports is getting higher and higher and higher. And I think it's no surprise to you that 80% of this import are building materials. Steel, cement, aluminum, glass, and machineries to use these materials. How do you think how healthy such an economy is? I mean, I guess no one of you is an economist. I'm neither, but I think, right? Basically, that's saying you earn in the year, per month, let's say you earn 1,000 Swiss francs, but you spend 2,500. Is this healthy? Is this sustainable? You would need to call your parents, right? Say, either you give me something or I have to change my lifestyle. So you see this whole, the GDP we saw before, right? How Ethiopia is number 3 in the world, stuff like that. All of that you have to understand is a very, very fragile system. And the result is not only a kind of fragile economical system, the result is also, you see here, typologies which are coming with this technology. So let's say the Germans are not only exporting steel and cement and glass to Ethiopia, they also send right away the architectural plans with it. And what happens is that all of a sudden, typologies which we knew from the 1950s or the post-war period in Europe are sent with that to Ethiopia, and basically the mentality is, okay, what was good for the 1950s in Germany should be good for the Africans, in the 2010s. So not only a kind of a material jeopardy is happening, but also with it comes a way of living which has absolutely nothing, seriously, nothing to do with the African culture or African lifestyle. So, as was mentioned, I lived for almost 3 years in Ethiopia. I was running an architectural institute there. And the moment I came to Africa, I thought I should change this, right? I thought I should start to think about new ways how to build a so-called African city. But understanding all of a sudden that this has a much larger impact to a whole economy, I changed my mind. And I said what we should do, instead of kind of making new plans or urban layouts like that, we have to make sure that the palette of architects is getting bigger again. Basically saying the small and medium enterprises should not only know how to work steel and concrete, they should also know how to work with local and indigenous materials. So what we did, and that is a little bit what we're doing for the last 6-7 years, is basically developing alternatives. So not saying that I want to get rid of concrete and steel. I think that would be the wrong approach. I think it's a very good material, right? Seriously, it's fantastic. But we need to be able to use more than that. So basically our research, or I think what the role of the ETH or the Future Cities Laboratory can be or should be, is to invest into research to make our palette and our possibilities bigger. And I will run through a couple of examples with you that show attempts, right? You can judge if that is maybe helpful or not. But in the end, I just want to show you a variety of possible ways you could start thinking about this theme. One that we did was the so-called Zulu, a sustainable urban dwelling unit, where we tried to understand a material which is right now still 40% of the world population is actually living in, is so-called earthen dwellings. So a building material, earth, soil, that you can find worldwide. Anywhere you dig, you have a building material. So what we did is kind of making sure that when we talk about earth as a building material, doing this on a very high professional level. You see here Philip Bloch, professor here at the Department of Architecture, who is kind of an expert in vaulting techniques, especially in Catalan vaulting techniques. And with his help, we built in Ethiopia, in Addis Ababa, the first time a so-called Catalan vaulting ceiling that solved two things. Number one is you don't need any cement or concrete. So with these vaulting shells, they're very thin, like 4 to 6 centimeters. You can actually span, in this case, an area of 4.5 by 6 meters without using a single gram of cement or steel. Actually, in the end, you will see the whole house that we built did not use any cement or steel except for one ring beam. So 95% of the house were built out of loam or of earth, and only 5% we used a ring beam, a reinforced ring beam. A second big advantage is that this technology can be used without any foam work. So you don't have to cut trees, which Ethiopia doesn't have a lot. To build a foamwork underneath, in the concrete technology, you first have to have the foamwork and stuff like that. So we used also this one here just to have a stand. So that's the only wood we used to have a stand for the people to construct this house. In the end, it was a double story. So you see here this urban dwelling unit. The idea is to build row houses out of that. So that's why this facade has no opening. And everything that we used, as I said, was earth. Even the plaster, the wall in the first level was a rammed earth technology. This one was loam stone. These windows were reused from construction sites. We got the metal from there and built in there. Even the stair inside was built with natural stone. You see here the ceiling. How it's put together is with a gypsum, indigenous material in Ethiopia. And next to that, also, we try to build up knowledge. So not only that we try to build a building, but we taught a lot of people how to use the material to produce little bricks, to produce rammed earth technologies, and so on and so on. And by now, we have a couple of spin-off companies. Basically, what they did, they learned with us how to produce these bricks, and right now they sell these bricks in Ethiopia to other people. While the first one was in the urban side, we also had a sister project, which was called the Sustainable Rural Dwelling Unit. And again here, we tried to establish a methodology to build with indigenous local materials. You see here the house is built again in the earth technology, while the roof is constructed with grass and bamboo, using traditional techniques like an umbrella construction that is carrying this huge roof, and underneath the roof structure, you have basically a large space. And what we did the first time here, introducing a separation between the cattle that is underneath here in this room back there, and the people sleeping, because a big problem in the rural areas is that the hygienic conditions, having cattle and people together, are not ideal. So here we tried with this typology, the architectural typology, not only introducing additional materials, but also introducing new spatial layouts for the people. Same thing happened. We are running right now huge programs actually in Ethiopia, teaching young architects and also TVET colleges, so people who are learning vocational trainings, how to use loam as a building material, reinforced here with hay or straw, how to produce blocks out of that, and how to build with these blocks then these houses, the typologies we just saw. Interesting enough, you remember Philip Bloch, these days Ethiopians took over to explain to youngsters how these vaults and how these techniques can be established with very little means, just with a chain, and to find out if a vault structure is thick enough and how the forces are running through these structures. A third one was called SECU. It's a Sustainable Emerging City Unit. You can imagine that as we speak today, what are small villages in Ethiopia, in 1 year, in 2 years, they double, triple, quadruple their size. And we thought of a material which can be handled very, very easy. And we came up with the idea of using straw as a building material. Straw is usually burned on the fields. In Ethiopia, it is useless for them. The only thing they use is when the ashes are on the field to kind of fertilize the ground again. But more or less, we made sure that we can use straw. When you press it together with some heat, straw has starch inside, and that starch can act as a natural glue. So when you press straw, you get a natural bondage between the homes, and then we put a cardboard around it to get large panels. And with this panel system, here you see them. So here you see the pressed straw with the panels aside, almost like a gypsum board. We developed details that could help us to put these panels together as a housing structure. Again, we always try to do 2 stories because the biggest problem in architecture is usually the ceiling. So we always build 2 stories to force ourselves to tackle all the technical problems at once. Here you see the walls out of this material. Here you see the panels, which are the ceiling. And we had vertical panels like a Kassettendecke. And a ring beam again. You always need a ring beam, but this time we did it out of a bamboo plywood system and some steel connectors here. And I hope this is running. So you see that we, together with ETH students, we built this. We were flying there for 1 week, and basically in 1 week we were able to build 1 story and the ceiling, and then the Ethiopian students took over and built in the 2nd week the 2nd story and the roof of the building. The thing you have to imagine is that you cannot have water, so no rain, so we had to protect the site that no water could get inside the straw panels. You see here now the ring beam being constructed here. And what we had here on top is that the cut was not even, so we had some problems connecting the 2nd floor. And here we were inventive and used cheese, so a byproduct of the milk production, this cottage cheese, Hüttenkäse, which we found out was a perfect area without cracking, and it also had a gluing effect. So you see here students now filling the cottage cheese as the connector on the ring beam, instead of using cement, right? So we always try to find alternative systems for using this. And then when I said the Sudo used approximately 5 cement of steel and concrete, we were able here to reduce the cement to 0, so there's no cement whatsoever. The only thing that we still have is a little bit of the steel. Okay. So that is a project that's going on. We started this in 2009, so that's now 5 years that I'm trying to convince the government of Ethiopia and the government of Addis Ababa to listen to us. And maybe you know that, that finally now, I think 8 weeks ago, the city of Addis Ababa asked us to build now 5,000 units. So they got the idea that this might be a possibility for the future. And in the studio that we are running right now, with our students, we are designing 5,000 units based on this research and trying to minimize the use of concrete and steel. And I have to say, what we did here is the extreme, okay? We try to push the envelope as much as we could. That does not mean that when our students now design, that we forbid them steel and concrete. That's not the idea. But we want to, as I said before, to make them aware that there's more than that. And especially at the ETH, I can say that because I was educated here, we have the thinking that whatever we do, we first design, and then we ask us afterwards, what is the material I would like to build it with? And in 98% of the cases, the answer is concrete. So it became so part of our mind that concrete solves each of our problem that we don't even ask ourselves what else could we do. So that's what we're trying to change, especially with these research projects and now with the commission of the Ethiopian government. Let's go back to we talked now a lot about the cement. We are also doing a research. You saw that we still use steel in the connectors. We are still trying to kind of also finding alternatives for steel. So here you see the population growth again, you see the developing territories, and we found a plant which is growing exactly also in this area, which is bamboo. The reason why we are interested in bamboo is a material characteristics or a property which has to do with the tensile strength of bamboo. So basically, when you compare bamboo fibers with sisal, steel, flux, and carbon fibers, you will find that if you extract single bamboo fibers, some species, and we're talking about 1,400 species, some of these species have the double tensile capacity as steel. You know that steel, next to the question of costs and where it's produced and CO2 and stuff like that, but also steel becomes by now the factor why most of our reinforced concrete buildings have building damages. In fact, 90% of all building damages that we know so far in infrastructural buildings are due to the corrosion of steel. And the big advantage, of course, is that bamboo does not corrode, it does not rust. Plus, it is very light compared to steel. It does not need a lot of energy to be produced. You could have a social equity in those territories where it's growing. And the question is, if we think of bamboo as a replacement for steel, is this a new idea? The answer is very easy. It is not. In the 1960s, in America, here in shown in the book The Gift of the Gods of Hidalgo, the Americans tried to reinforce concrete with bamboo, with natural bamboo fibers. That means they took a bamboo column, they cut it into pieces, smaller ones, and they placed it into concrete in the hope that this tensile capacity would be strong enough to hold the concrete. That worked out for approximately 3 to 4 months. So in the first 3 to 4 months, nothing happened. And everyone was super happy, applauding, fantastic. We don't need more any steel. And then all of a sudden, these buildings collapsed. And the question is why? And of course, then over the years, people found out if you put a natural bamboo, just cut it and place it into concrete, what the bamboo is doing is absorbing water from the surrounding. And then when it absorbs water, it grows bigger, it expands. And when a material inside the concrete is expanding, it is cracking the concrete itself. Then, through the cracks, the water can evaporate again. So the water goes out, and the bamboo shrank again. It went back to its original size. That's what happened approximately 3 to 4 months after the pouring of the concrete. And when you have a so-called debonding a D-bond between your reinforcement and your concrete, your reinforcement does not work anymore. So basically the friction is lost, and then the forces, the tensile and the pressure force cannot be taken. So that's when these buildings collapsed. What we're trying now in Singapore, that what we built here is a so-called Advanced Fiber Composite Laboratory in Singapore, is to make sure that we can produce a bamboo-based reinforcement which does not absorb water. So basically we are researching the possibility to not use natural bamboo, but what we're doing is we take only the fibers or fiber bundles, we mix them with a biological-based resin, and we press them in any shape that you would like to have. This is the lab that we are running in Singapore. We're using, as I said, bamboo from all over the world, different species. That's our postdoc, Mateusz, who is a chemist. He's understanding the chemistry behind all of this. And we are producing a material which looks approximately like that. So a very dense material which has a tensile capacity roughly as much as steel has. By the way, if you want to see this, there is an exhibition right now in the main building of ETH where you can see these samples being exhibited the first time. And then what we do is, of course, testing it. We have laboratories test the tensile capacity in this case with the testing machine. We look at the microstructures. We understand how the resin is interacting with the bamboo fibers, if they're holes or if they're filled, and so on, so on. And we're producing right now first series of these reinforcement systems. We're putting them into concrete. We're testing the concrete as well, and trying to understand if this material could actually, in the end, be a competitor to steel, and that maybe, I don't know, 2 to 3 years from now, that we have first results, if this is working out or not. The motivation, you understand maybe again, I was unhappy that in all the buildings I built in Ethiopia, I still had to use steel. So I said, let's find something else. And that's the motivation behind that. I mean, that is not new, and I can also show you here a small clip.
Using it in almost an artistic way, showing new ways of how can be used as an incredible building material, which is cheap, light, and all the advantages that we talked about before. We are going one step further.
Here you see the bamboo being split. And that's what they put originally in the concrete, just like that.
Material that might get into the high-tech building and construction. That's why we're interested in one plant, which is growing exactly in these territories, which is bamboo. I'm not saying that this is the only one, but this is a start where we can look into this incredible fiber and make sure we make it in an industrialized way available for the construction sector and the developing territories.
That's really necessary, I think, for our future to find new solutions and creative ways to use materials and use resources and do so in a way that is even more inspiring than anything that you've done before.
It's not looking backward, it's not kind of pointing to a romantic idea of using bamboo as this green and environmentally friendly stuff. That's not what we're into. We're looking actually to high-tech research and high-tech production, using a natural resource as removal and could point into a different direction of how we think in the future of building materials in a sustainable way.
It's not out of bamboo yet, but so also here we're running with different companies now. We are about to make a startup company by the end of the year, together with the company Rehau, who is a polymer producer, and basically showing that our system can be combined with any known system in the concrete, and so on. And now you see, I mean, developing this one, what is bothering me is that one, right? So now in a second thought, in a further thought, we're even thinking about replacing concrete. And I just show you two things. One that we are very much interested in right now, this is a map of the municipal solid waste disposal in the world. Yeah.
Is this material cheaper than steel?
It is right now in the laboratory scale. It is cheaper. We hope that we go into a production scale that it's much cheaper. Because you're right, this is the only argument that counts, right? If I produce a thing which might be ecological, more sustainable, nobody cares. But if I can say use my reinforcement as only half the price, then you have an advantage in the market. So this is a map showing the disposal of solid municipal waste, and you see here exactly a flip chart, right? What you see here is that all of a sudden that the countries we usually look at right now so far, they are producing almost no waste. But all of our civilized nations producing a lot of waste. We wrote a book, which just was published last week. It's called Building from Waste, where we put together 100 examples of how waste can be turned into new building materials. And of course, I would be super happy if you pick up a copy. It's available online as well as here in the Höngerberg. And I just give you maybe 2 examples of how this works. So for example, there is one project in there which deals with wasted paper. What they do is they take the wasted paper and they roll it back into looking like a wood lock, right? So you roll axial the paper on top of each other, and after that you can cut it in any shape and also can use it almost like any other wooden application sense. So that's one example. The other one is looking at materials which we usually don't consider as a building material. So this one being mushroom. Mushroom, when they grow, they have an incredible strong mycelium, so the root system. And there's a company called Ecovative in New York City, where they're producing elements so far only for the packing industry, that they grow this mycelium, this mushroom root system, into any shape you would like. So they put sawdust as a fertilizer, they put the mycelium with it, and they have a foam work, and then you leave it there for 24 hours with water and with light, and then you grow these shapes, or any shape you would like, with these mushroom mycelium. You stop water, you stop sunlight, they die, and afterwards you can use them as you would like. Maybe you heard about this. They won a competition a year ago for the MoMA, the PS1 in New York City, with this structure. So they propose to build now towers out of stones which are produced with this material. I was skeptical, but I think 8 weeks ago this tower was opened. So right now they built the first structure, and you see here these stones out of a cultivated building material. And we are now in negotiations with them that we can maybe deliver a reinforcement system that they can use to grow their mushrooms around. They're still skeptical about this, so we have to do a lot of convincing. But our idea would be to combine, for example, these 2 materials and therefore getting rid of concrete. Another example that we do, or that we are, or that I'm at least very much interested, and that's the last one, is sand. Maybe you did you follow in the last couple of weeks this discussion in TV and in the newspapers that sand is getting to its end? We're running out of sand. So you know that concrete uses 2/3 of concrete is basically sand, and sand is a material which you can find in oceans. And it has its source actually in environments like this one, in the Alps, where small particles are washed by streams and rivers into the ocean, and then in the ocean it becomes maritime sand, and that sand is usually used for the building industry because it has a rough surface and it has a size of the corn is between 0.05 millimeters and 2 millimeters. This sand that we use for the concrete industry is running out. So there is a whole, what is called here, a sand war going on right now in the world. For example, Singapore, no neighboring country wants to sell sand anymore to them because what they did is they were illegally purchasing sand from companies which are sucking with huge boats in Southeast Asia. They're running on the ocean. They have a vacuum cleaner which is going to the ground of the ocean. They're sucking the sand up. And what's happening is then that through erosion, beaches in neighboring islands are simply disappearing and going back into the ocean. So in the last 10 years, approximately 80 islands in Indonesia disappeared because of this illegal practice. The same is true actually in all the world. Morocco lost 50% of its beaches in the last 10 years. Florida is losing, I don't know how many square kilometers of beaches. So there is a real problem. But there is one thing which so far we cannot tap into, which is desert sand. Desert sand right now cannot be used for the concrete industry because the sizes, the corns are round of the wind. When the wind is blowing it around, it gets very, very round. So it's not rough, it has no friction. Plus, the corn size is too small. This is a project of an architect again, a researcher. Ginger Creek is her name. And she found a way to mix desert sand with bacteria that produce calcium. So basically she's mixing sand, the desert sand, adds bacteria to it and adds a little bit of a fluid that the bacteria start to do their thing. And the excrements of the bacteria is calcium. And calcium is then gluing together these small little particles, sand particles, again in forms that, for example, you can use as bricks. I think that's a new way to think about concrete. The bacteria will replace the cement part of the concrete. You have an aggregate, the sand, but the sand is, huge amounts still available, especially, think about it again, in those territories, for example, the Sahara Desert, where the highest population growth and highest urbanization rates are to be found. Another person is Markus Kaiser, a German guy. He's a designer. And he developed a 3D printer that is run by solar power and with a huge lens is producing a super high temperature point on his 3D printer where he can start melting sand together in any shape you would like. So basically he's putting the sand here that he finds in the desert into his 3D plotter, and with the help of the sun and then rotating that thing, he can create any shape you would like with a material which is only heated or sintered, that's the right term, sintered sand. And I think also here that could be a hint for the future. Actually, what we do right now in Singapore is starting also a sand lab. So I would like that the ETH Zurich starts to think about, even so Switzerland is in the perfect condition, and Switzerland has 90% of its own sand, or of its use, being found here in Switzerland. I think that the ETH should start to think about these larger problems. And in Singapore right now, we are establishing a sand lab, a sand laboratory, where we think about other ways how to make the source, the desert sand, available for the building industry. Okay, if you want to have other ideas or anything else that you might be interested in, that's our homepage address. I hope that you understood that when we think as architects, we can not only think about objects and buildings. We should always question ourselves, what is the system behind? How do the materials, or where do the materials come from? And if I'm not happy with what I have, to start thinking about alternative ideas. And that's, I think, how we can start research, especially in institutions like ours. I think I'm at the end. Do you have any questions?
You opened your talk by mentioning that North America and Europe is built, and there aren't going to be major initiatives in these areas. What would you recommend to young architects and engineers in terms of orienting their career? Do you think that most people here should be looking towards Africa and Asia for their career, or what would be your perspective?
I think I can all talk for myself. I think what I think interesting as being an architect in these times is to question our conceptions. So far, and that's what I try to say, is ideas and thoughts of architecture, building system, urbanism, travel usually from north to south. What would be if we can learn, and for a while stick our hand in the south? What can we learn there to bring back to the north? I call this a kind of a a remodernization. So kind of leaving for a while our comfortable zone, right? The comfortable zone of saying, I design anything I want, and I'm sure in Switzerland I find someone who can build it for me. You can, actually. That's possible. But that's the comfort zone. And for me as an architect right now, it's very, very interesting to leave this comfort zone for a while and bring back new ideas which are born out of a necessity in the global south. That is what makes my heart beat faster. And I think it's unique. It's unique to our generation. I think that question was never asked in any generation before us. And this ideology or this idea of not seeing the South only as a recipient, but also as a producer of new ideas and new research themes. I mean, each one of you, come on, you think about any material you think you can replace, just ask yourself this question. And there is no question dumb enough, I tell you. Start yourself, I mean, I came up with bamboo. Start yourself as what else can replace steel? Yeah, why not? And start thinking about it seriously. And start to think about what implementation does this have. And I tell you, I run into problems every day. And it's not that you have a solution, it's okay, that's it. Right? That is tough. And maybe you come at a dead point on a certain point, on a certain time slot. That, for example, we are right now really trying hard with the bamboo project not to be seen as people who are creating a monster, an ecological monster. Saying you have a biological source like bamboo, but then you're mixing it together with a chemical product, and in the end what you produce is a kind of a Sondermüll, right? It's something that you cannot kind of... So we have to overcome all of these questions. We have to make sure that our material is also recyclable, and so on, so on, so on. So it's things that I think you have to go very naive about them in the beginning. Because when you know already the problems, you lose interest from the very first moment. So be as naive as possible.
Two questions.
Yeah.
First, I was wondering, what is the production time for the straw plates you're creating? How long does it take to set them? And is it easy to do, like on the big scale, for 5,000 houses? And second, what do you see as the impact of these researches for, let's say, slums where it's not as easy to get straw or not as easy to get bamboo?
The first question on the straw panels, you can produce them while running. So you can produce, I don't know, a meter of that panel, 2 meters wide, in 10 seconds. Okay, so it's a roll, it's a press, and it's endless. You feed the straw, then you have 2 big wheels. One is hot, one is cold, and you press it with these wheels, and you heat it up a little bit, and in the end, what rolls out is your panel. So super easy. And this company we dealt with here, where we had the panels from, they wanted to start a production line in Ethiopia. But in the end, Ethiopia asked 200% of import tax for their machinery. Now they produce in Rwanda. Okay, so you see how a good idea and is kind of running to a dead end because of economical reasons or because the government in Ethiopia did not see yet. I have to say, did not see yet the advantage to them. That might in 2 years change, okay? And they will ask them maybe to also produce in Ethiopia. Large quantities, yes. Right? I mean, straw is a material, seriously, you can again find it worldwide, right? Straw is growing in endless amounts. It is the byproduct of a grain harvest, and you know how much grain is produced. So look at the numbers of grain production, you know how much material you would have for the building sector. The second question was again?
About slums.
Yeah, the slums, yeah. Yes, here I can give you an example of the Addis Ababa. What Addis Ababa is trying to do in a so-called Millennium Goal is to upgrade what they call renewal of slum areas. So you're right. I mean, to ask these people living there to do so, you can't, because they have no income, right? There's no possibility. But if the government, the city government or national government, would provide them the material and say, well, you can use this for a small amount, or you pay me back in installments or whatever, then I would say yes. And that's what we're trying right now with these 5,000 units, which are also part of a renewal project. That's part number one of the answer. Part number two of the answer is, if more and more people see that with such alternative materials you actually can build, I'm sure that also those who have a little bit of money, they would rather go for a material which is much cheaper than steel and concrete. I tell you, we had so many people looking at this earth building. They simply looked at the costs. They realized that this building is 4 times cheaper than anything else they can build. And that's why they started now building on their own, without our help even, building on their own in these techniques. So that like I said before, the economical factor is the key to all of these things, sadly enough. Yeah.
So, do you see the possibility of using any of those new materials in the context over here?
Yes.
Like in a bigger scale?
Yes.
For example, like...
Did you see the new Ricola building of Herzog Dömerow in Basel? You should go and see it. They built in loam. And all of a sudden in Switzerland, loam is becoming a very luxurious and very expensive building material. So there is a switch already happening. And loam or earth becomes a very trendy, modern building material, even here in Switzerland or in most of Europe.
How about like bamboo replacing steel in skyscrapers? Is it possible?
We start with 2 stories and then we see how we can go above that.
You talk about a lot of the ways using biological ways like bacteria, like bamboo and others. How about fire?
No, that's true.
Very
Yes.
key issue for
absolutely. I mean, in this book I showed, every material you find in there has a fire rating. So it is clear that you have to fulfill certain criteria to use it also as a official or standardized or kind of certified building material. Absolutely. That is given. That is under a running line which you should not question. Safety first. Absolutely. Yeah.
Straw panel don't burn?
No. Straw panels, actually you can see it on when you look on the internet, you see, because the straw is so compressed, so high, there is no oxygen inside. And if you have a material without oxygen, it does not burn. So I think this has a fire rating of F90. I mean, that's very hard to reach with our usual materials because of its compactness. That's why we also were allowed to build this actually in Ethiopia, because we could prove that we had the certifications for this.
Is that patented? Because you said one company is doing it and they're not allowed to.
No, there are many companies.
Okay.
I mean, we dealt with one from Berlin, but even here in Switzerland, there are a couple of companies producing these panels, and a lot of buildings being built here in Switzerland also out of straw. In France right now, I think a huge market.
Isn't the power then still by the people who are making it, and not yet? You're not empowering the people who it's for, in a sense.
Yeah, but on the other side, you have to see again. Look at the system, okay? So buying the straw from your farmers, you already support like I don't know thousands of farmers with I don't know a couple of square meters of your panel. Then you need people to hire in these factories to produce them. You need people to bring it from the factory towards the building sites. You need people being trained to use them. So it's true, the capital and maybe the ideology comes from one point, but the impact that you have is much bigger than just this one nucleus. Again, think in systems. Right? That is usually the key.
The renewability of bamboo is quite obvious, but how about desert sands and earth? I mean, once you start rebuilding a city like Addis Ababa, you have also problems of...
Yeah. See, I mean, yeah, I asked myself the same question, and I researched on the earth. What is happening when they build a building, doesn't matter, somewhere in Africa or even here? What happens with the earth you dig out for excavation? And I found out that they put them in Addis Ababa, they put them next to rivers, so they hope when the next flooding comes that it is simply taken away. So then I think, before we put it next to rivers, I use it as a building material. But you have to be careful that when you build with earth, you're not destroying a kind of the humus, the topsoil, right? That has to be kept and be put either on top again or kind of stored somewhere, and it's not discarded because the topsoil is important for growing food and for other animals.
Like you were saying, the straw they burn on fields has a use.
Yeah, exactly. Again, I think what I learned about the concrete technology also, that these should only be alternatives, right? I don't want to scratch off one material from the palette because then I fall back to the same situation as before. We have only one choice. I would like to have 30, 50 choices instead of only 2. That is the idea. And if we run parallel, I think we can balance one deficiency with another positive aspect as we go along. Okay. Thank you very much, and please come to the